Today is Monday, September 29th, 2025, the 235th episode of Shea Station, and your New York Mets are going to Cancun. They are out of the playoffs, 83-79. Not enough to get that final wild card spot. They had everything going for them on the last day. The Brewers took care of business, won their last regular season game against the Reds, and your New York Mets could not help themselves. If you are a Mets fan here, wallowing, welcome. If you are a Phillies fan here, celebrating, welcome. Make sure you leave a comment for the algorithm. It helps. Oh, man, so much to say and so little to say at the same time. I am your only host today, Jolly Olive. Me and Jerry are going to do a show later this week. Probably do some voicemails as well, so keep your eye out on Shea Station socials. If you feel like calling in and telling us about how you feel, keep those voicemails tight if you can, so we can fit them on the show. The Mets go down to Miami in control of their own destiny, only needing a series win against a team they're supposed to be better than to get into the playoffs. They are unable to do that. They lose 2 of 3 in the same fashion that they lost 2 of 3 in 2008, in the same fashion that they lost 2 out of 3 in 2007. Baseball is a cruel, cruel sport, but you can't blame the baseball gods for this one. You really can only blame the disaster that is the 2025 Mets roster. They did that thing again where they won game 161. Clay Holmes had his best start of the year. It's insane. It is insane that it happened that way again. John Maine in 07 struck out 14. Johan Santana in 08 threw a shutout. And now Clay Holmes, not quite the Herculean performance like the other two, but still, the Mets threw a one-hitter in that game to keep their season alive. Oh, man. The media shitstorm has begun. I have my rally candle here, by the way, just to remind us of where we were last year. The Mets really followed up one of their most magical, unforgettable seasons, that the type of season that makes you fall in love with the sport all again. They followed that up with one of the most agonizing, unenjoyable, frustrating seasons that I think I've ever bore witness to as a Mets fan. I see it drawing a lot of comparisons to collapses of years past. I see it drawing comparisons to the shit show that was the 2021 season, the egregious disappointment that was the 2023 season, but I put this year in sort of a category of its own. These Mets were 21 games over 500, 45-24. You go back to really the David Peterson shutout as kind of like the peak of this season. They swept the Nationals in that series. What a concept. Sweeping the Nationals, beating a team you should beat. How funny. That was right before their first of 3 7-game losing streaks. 3. I can't believe that we got to utter on Talking Baseball the stat that there was only one team that had lost 7 games in a row 3 times in one season and still made the playoffs. That team, of course, being the 2006 Cardinals. Of course, to just rub a little bit more salt in the ever-gaping 3.5-month wound that every Mets fan bore watching this team. Ever since that shutout, this team played pretty much exclusively miserable baseball. There were spurts here and there. They swept the Angels. They swept the Giants on the road before, of course, losing 7 in a row again. And it was just frustrating, almost end to end. Whereas I feel like some of these other seasons are more true collapses. 07, that is a true collapse. 7 up with 17 to go. 08 kind of gets that label too. The lead was less. The amount of games was more. But that's still a team that should have made the playoffs that didn't. 2021, that was a team that was relishing in the fact that they were in first place in July, and then they got the shit kicked out of them down the stretch and also traded away a future superstar in the process. And then 2023, that season kind of ended in May, if we're being realistic. And honestly, the Mets came out of that looking okay with their trade deadline. This season gets put in a class of its own. And it starts with the payroll. Obviously, it starts with the roster construction of this team. And when you see people panning this team, which they will for the next minimum 6 months, you might get a break during the playoffs because people will be focused on other teams. But there's going to be a lot of Mets discourse about how much they invested in this team and how little they got out of it for a long time. And fair. They deserve to be criticized after the putrid season that they had. A lot will be talked about the roster construction. The thing that frustrates me is that the guys who made the most money on this team, the three guys that made the most money, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, and Pete Alonso, all had terrific seasons. Juan Soto falls 2 stolen bases shy of a 40-40 season. He finishes the year leading the National League in stolen bases. Also with a 921 OPS, not too bad. Francisco Lindor goes 30-30 again, 31-31 to be specific. And Pete Alonso drives in 126 runs, completely redeeming the frustrating regular season he had last year that we kind of forget about because of those playoff heroics. Those three guys add up to the Cincinnati Reds payroll. Those three guys add up to the entirety of the Reds roster financially. And they were all worth it. They were all completely worth it. There was nothing I would change about the contracts that those guys received, but they will bear the brunt of the criticism because of the dollar signs attached to their name, unfortunately. Where this team fails is everything that falls kind of beneath that. That's not the wins they had on the margins. And we're going to talk a lot about David Stearns in this episode. I don't know how much we're actually going to talk about the games in Miami themselves, because let's be real. Do we really want to talk about that? I don't think you want to hear about that. I don't want to talk about it. So let's just we know what happened. You watched. You're not coming to Shea Station today saying, I wonder what they did in Miami. Did they win? Did they compete? No. Moving on from that. Where this roster completely failed was the sunken cost of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars on players that simply just were not worth that money. Sean Manaea made $25 million this year. Frankie Montas made $17 million this year. Jeff McNeil made $16 million this year. Kodai Senga made $15 million this year. AJ Minter, while he was good before he got hurt, made $11 million this year. Jesse Winker, $7.5 million this year to play 20 games. And it goes on and on and on and on. And you just think about how much better that money could have been allocated. And some of it will come off the books, but a lot of it won't, which is very, very frustrating for this team. You look up and down this roster and you see all the individual performances that get wasted, unfortunately. I already talked about Alonso, Soto, and Lindor. Edwin Diaz had a season that you could argue rivals his historic 2022 campaign, albeit with a little bit less of a K per 9, only at a paltry 13.3 this year for Edwin Diaz, but still a terrific season. Only 28 saves on the year because the Mets were either blowing teams out or not coming back late and losing all the close games they played. But he had a terrific year, and now we wait to see if he opts out. Which, by the way, I'm not going to do too much on this. Pete Alonso going Garrett Cole style and saying right after the game, "Yeah, I'm opting out. I hope I get to come back," is pretty funny. Can you blame him? I can't really. Edwin Diaz, though, said he's going to talk to his family first and then make a decision after that. That was nice to hear. I'm glad it wasn't both of them, because that would have been a lot. You waste that individual performance. If you go to their page, the 2025 Mets, and you look at the rotation, you'll see 4 different guys who pitched at least 14 starts with an above league average ERA. And you'd say, wow, that's a pretty good rotation. That looks like a playoff rotation. And it does not tell that underlying story, obviously. There's so much blame to pass around, and unfortunately, a lot of it is going to go to the leaders on this team that I don't really think deserve it. And more so, I think it comes down to this organization as a whole, which just, it's hard to say what exactly is wrong with this team right now. I mean, a lot of it comes down to coaching. A lot of it comes down to David Stearns, who had a bad year. Point blank, had a bad year with a lot of the moves that he made this offseason, with a lot of the trade deadline moves he made that completely backfired. But if you are an angry radio listener or you're calling into shows and you're blaming Soto, blaming Lindor, blaming Alonso, which I don't think you guys are doing, because I think we have a pretty in-tune fan base that listens to the show. But those people are just wrong. And it's a shame that those guys are going to bear the brunt of a lot of this criticism because they are the faces of this team. But the Mets did go down to Miami and their warts got shown. Everything that made this team frustrating to watch all season long was on display in this 3-game series. I first want to talk about timing. And this sort of goes into the bad luck, quote unquote, aspect of the New York Mets this year, which I don't think luck is the reason they didn't make the playoffs. I'm just going to come out and say that. But Brett Baty finally is entrusted with an everyday role after Mark Vientos puts on a defensive disaster class in Chicago. One at bat into this full trust circle that he's now entered, in the last series of the season. He strains his oblique and his season ends. That sucks. Which means you have to play Ronnie Mauricio, who you haven't played in the entire month of September, essentially, at third base for the rest of the series and the most crucial series of the year. That's great. Timing. Brandon Sproat throws 4 scoreless innings, and he looks pretty good doing it. The Mets enter that 5th inning without a plan. Sproat gets knocked around. I believe he gives up 3 hits on, 6 pitches? Less than that. He gives up 3 hits on 4 pitches to start the 5th inning. No one's warming up until that 4th or until that 3rd hit happens. And by then, the inning completely spirals out of control. Gregory Soto comes in to face a bunch of right-handed hitters and lets the thing get out of hand to the point where the Marlins lead 6-2. And from there, the Mets just kind of roll over. Bad timing, bad decision-making. And a failure to plan, really, in that moment as well. Then you go to the finale of this series. And we've been a pretty pro-Mendoza pod for his entire tenure after May of 2024. And a lot of people have problems with Carlos Mendoza, and those people got pretty validated this year, where he had some really, really ugly decisions and just bad moments throughout this entire season. And I don't know how much of this bullpen day was his decision-making solely. I'm sure that it was a collective decision from many people. But the sheer overmanaging of this game and the sheer lack of trust to more talented arms sank the Mets early. Now, I'm not going to excuse the offense putting up absolutely 0 runs, but point blank, they looked very tight. They looked like they were pressing. They looked like they understood that the season was crumbling underneath them in the middle of this game. The reliever with the most appearances on the New York Mets this year was not Edwin Diaz, was not Huascar Brazoban, who went up and down. Still finished with 52 appearances this year. Not Reed Garrett, because he got injured at the end. He finishes with 58. No, the reliever with the most appearances this year was Ryan Stanek. And how fitting it was to see Ryan Stanek come in the 4th inning of a must-win game after the Mets had been patching together decent pitching through that. They had gone from Minaya to Brazoban to Raley. Raley gives up a single to Connor Norby, who's been a thorn. He worked a good at-bat. And Stanek is the first guy in as your right-hander after that. And that is symbolic of poor roster construction, the stubbornness of this organization to not admit failures, and then the lack of planning from your manager and your coaching staff to put Stanek in that situation. I know that he'd been pitching better in September. I understand that. And we know that Stanek is kind of a late season guy. He showed up last year late in the season. We thought it was happening again this year. And he gives up a double, a deep fly ball, and another double in the span of 8 pitches before he's taken from this game. And the game just kind of spirals from there. And the Mets were never going to win this game 162. I had hoped that maybe they could have a shot at rewriting history and changing the narrative of game 162's past versus the Marlins, which is, it's insane that we now have 3 examples of this. I still can't get over that. But I think any Mets fan knew as soon as they had an 0 for 5 with runners in scoring position through, I think, 3 innings, that this is how this was going to go. And the Pete Alonso 116 mile per hour line out with the bases loaded and 2 outs, the hardest hit ball of the entire year by the New York Mets, That was really the cherry on top. That was when, and I'm going to be candid here, and you might judge me for this, and I understand it. That was when I shut off the game. And I drove to my parents' house for dinner, and we had a really nice time. I didn't check my phone because I knew what was going to happen. And I thought, let me save myself from these last 4 innings, because I've watched every inning of every game this year in agonizing detail. Let me spare myself the end, because I think I've earned that. And I think most Mets fans have earned that. After we sold the most tickets in franchise history, we were the 4th ranked team in attendance this year. Steve Cohen called on the fans to pack the ballpark, and we did that. And this is what they gave us in return. I think at that moment in game 162, at the end of that 5th inning, or in the middle of it, I guess I should say, I think that I had earned a break from this team. And I hate the feeling of being relieved that it's over, because I'm frustrated. I'm sad. This team underachieved. They got great performances that got completely wasted. But I hate that I feel a sense of relief that I don't have to talk about them anymore, because this was truly one of the most unenjoyable seasons of Mets baseball I've ever seen. And it sounds weird because you saw the winning record. You got to watch the brilliance and greatness of Juan Soto, another great season from Francisco Lindor. But I just feel so much relief that I don't have to watch the 2025 Mets, because this slow death over the course of 3 months it felt like taking years off my life. And also, I've had a nice year. I've gotten to travel this year. I got engaged this year. A lot of good things happened to me this year, but unfortunately, the way my brain works is that the performance of my stupid baseball team occupies the way I behave and the way I react sometimes. So in the middle of what was one of the better years of my life, as I graduate into adulthood and begin planning a wedding with the woman I love, and traveling to places I've never been before, and enjoying my career continuing to be successful, and I'm so thankful for all that I get to work in sports media. I have so much to be thankful for, and yet this team made me bitter and angry and sad constantly. And I'm glad that I don't have to deal with them anymore. God, this podcast is going to be ranty. Sorry, guys. I'm excited to see, one, how much fat gets trimmed from this roster. There are a lot of faces in this clubhouse that I think might not return next year. And they have no one but themselves to blame. The guys that do remain, they have no one but themselves to blame. But you look at the roster construction of this team, and this is not a playoff team. Playoff teams don't have multiple guys on their offense that don't have a position. Starling Marte can't play the field. Jesse Winker played 5 innings of left field, and it ended his season. Mark Vientos got fully benched for a month, had one good month this year. They tried to play him, and he showed a complete incapability to field his position. Ronnie Mauricio, who all got us excited with that home run in San Diego, also can't field his position and can't run the bases because of his ACL tear. That's 4 guys that got significant playing time this year that you really can't plug in anywhere and trust them to play sound defense. Playoff teams don't do that. You have a bullpen. The Mets used the most pitchers of any team in MLB history this year. It was a constant rotating door of random names and fringe big league guys, a lot of them giving us great innings on the year. But the complete instability of that bullpen. This team was making roster moves on the second to last day of the season. No team in contention is doing that. The roster is set by then. That's insane. It wasn't even at a point of necessity at that point. But the sheer stubbornness to roster someone like Ryan Stanek throughout the entire year is symbolic of this front office refusing to admit faults and refusing to explain the urgency of the situation. And that kind of bleeds into the clubhouse as well. The amount of times that we heard that the talent in this room is undeniable, the amount of times that we heard that they just need to play better, or that they were getting unlucky, or that game plans were functioning, but they weren't getting the results they wanted. Those things are systemic of the organization. It bleeds from the front office to the coaching staff to the players of that. These guys are getting paid X amount and they've done these things in their career and they should be playing better based on that. And it is a plague that has ran rampant through this organization this year. Hopefully one that will change from here on in. But I know it's such a small thing. The DFA of Rico Garcia to keep Ryan Stanek on the roster. There's your right-handed reliever that you could have used in that game. I don't know. Those small decisions add up. And speaking of small decisions and small moments, how about all the losses that could have been wins this year? You have the horrible, horrible stat that the Mets never had a ninth inning comeback this year. And they had so many opportunities to get that done. I think they finished 0-67. That's not a playoff team. Playoff teams don't do that. Playoff teams are capable of making at least one ninth inning comeback. One, but which, by the way, would have gotten you into the playoffs, a spot that you most certainly did not deserve to have. So you have that. You have the 3 7-game losing streaks. Awesome. But above that, you have these horrible records for teams that had horrible years. You went 6-7 versus Miami this year. Miami didn't have a horrible year. In fact, that was an important stepping stone year for them in terms of their young players performing better. But still, you should be better than 6-7 against the Miami Marlins. You went 7-6 against the Nationals, which was the same record you had against the Phillies. That's nuts. That's a team you should be beating down. That includes a sweep they had earlier in the year. You scrub that sweep at home, which I mentioned before was like the last good moment of this season, and you're 4-6 against them. 2-4 against the Pirates, including a sweep on their turf. That's brutal. That can't happen. 0-3 against the Rays. They came into your house and they swept you. 5-8 against the Braves. Everyone was beating the Braves this year besides the last month of the season, and you couldn't even finish with a 500 record against them. The Mets played up to competition and they played down to competition all year, and it was incredibly frustrating to watch. And I really didn't want to do this, but you can get into the nitty-gritty of some of these losses as well. Between the Cleveland series at home, between the Philly sweep late in the season, those pairs of 1-0 losses, the losing that 11-inning game against the Nationals and then the 1-run game the day after. I mean, the Milwaukee series. Oh my God, the Milwaukee series was bad. The one in Milwaukee where they had a lead in the 8th inning of like all of those games and they lost all 3 of them. And it just goes on and on and on. Oh my God, this feels very cathartic for me. I did a podcast I think 3 weeks ago where they were in the midst of their third of 3 7-game losing streaks, where I got to go on the mic and just kind of rant, and people did like that. So I hope that you're enjoying this, even if it's a little scatterbrained and all over the place, because I'm doing this without an outline, no structure, no podcast partner. I'm just letting it rip. But this is cathartic for me. And if you are a Mets fan that's feeling frustration, find another Mets fan and have a conversation like this, because it does make you feel better, I will say. A lot is going to change for this organization, I hope. But they're still stuck with a lot of these guys. Sean Manaea had a terrible year, and I'm hoping he gets whatever surgery he needs to be right again. But that's $25 million for 60 innings of a 5.64 ERA. Kodai Senga said that he needs to start from scratch. I don't know what that means. That's scary. Because at the beginning of the year, the prospect of retaining Kodai Senga on the club option was like a big win for us. Of like, you don't want a guy to miss time, but it's a good thing he did because now we get to keep him for these next 3 years. Now it's feeling like, oh shit, we're stuck with Kodai Senga and he doesn't know who he is anymore. That's going to be hard to maneuver your way out of. Tyler McGill and Reed Garrett both have to get Tommy John surgery, so you won't see them next year. They provided pretty valuable innings for this team this year. And it goes on and on. And listen, yeah, it would have been nice to make the playoffs, sure. But what really would have happened to this team? They would have had to play the Dodgers and the Phillies. And if they had somehow miraculously gotten out of LA with 2 wins, because anybody can win a 3-game series, they were not beating this Phillies team. I know what happened last year was magic, and they were definitely the better team last year, but it certainly didn't feel like it this year. And maybe it is a blessing in disguise that you get to avoid that embarrassment on national TV. One last thing on this purely negative rant before I try and spin some optimism for the future, because I do want to include that in some capacity for this episode. Is it the worst trade deadline in Mets history? I think it's up there. And I don't think it's entirely David Stearns' fault, but like someone has to get blamed for this. The Mets brought in 5 players. They brought in Cedric Mullins, who somehow, all he really needed to do was hit league average to be better than Tyrone Taylor, and couldn't even do that. And I understand that when you play 8 years with one organization and you get traded, it's probably shell-shocking, but also you got to be a professional, man. You got traded to a winning ball club in a pennant race. He puts up a 565 OPS and plays way less quality center field defense, to the point that when Taylor came back for the last week of the season, we were dancing in the streets. And I love Tyrone, but the center field play from this season was rough to watch, especially at the plate. That's one player. You bring in Ryan Helsley in a pretty ballsy trade, honestly. Like, the Mets traded some fast risers in their system to get their hands on Ryan Helsley, who had a 3 ERA, 21 saves, led major leagues in saves last year with 49, got Cy Young votes in 2 of the last 3 seasons, and he puts up an ERA of 7.2 with you. He walks the world. He gives up so many dongs. His hit per 9 was 11.3. And perfectly, he figures out how to pitch again at the very end of the season. So he finishes the year on a 7-inning scoreless streak, which is just, he got a nice little sad inning in game 162 as well. But so many games that you put him in late resulted in losses. You brought in Tyler Rogers, whose numbers on paper look good, but did any of those innings feel good? I wish I had the numbers on hand for the amount of inherited runners that score, which I guess is a fault of Mendoza as well, because you have a reliever that plays to contact. Why are you using him in situations where there are already runners on base, where contact can be chaos and runs can be scored? He almost becomes a sleeper agent at times, trying to get his Giants into the playoffs. That's what it felt like when they were still chasing us down. I'd say he was hardly worth the prospect package dealt either. Although I think that's going to hurt the Mets a lot less in the long run. Buteau, Drew Gilbert, and Blade Tidwell. We'll see with Blade Tidwell. He had good numbers at AAA for the Giants. And it just goes on and on and on. Who else did we acquire here? Who else did we get? Am I missing someone? I feel like I'm definitely... Oh, Gregory Soto! Oh my God, he stinks. That was... Of all the terrible pitching I had to watch this year, that was some of the worst. A guy who 10 years into his major league career probably still doesn't know where his breaking ball is going at any time. Felt bad for Alvarez and Torrens catching him back there because they were just getting beat up. Just a bunch of guys that very clearly did not pitch well under pressure. And that was how you revamped your bullpen to make it from a weakness to a strength. And it ended up being worse than it was before. Oy, 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 oy. And before I get to optimism, and I promise I will, I'll try. David Stearns, man, I mentioned it before, but he had a horrible year of decision making for this ball club. I just mentioned the trade deadline. The Frankie Montas contract was an abject disaster. Point blank. It felt like that in the moment, and it's the reason that Luis Severino didn't come back. And I know that you look at Severino's numbers and you say, well, like, we didn't miss much there. I got to believe those numbers would have been better with the Mets defense behind him. And also 162 innings. That would have been nice. He wanted to come back here. He wanted to stay. And the Mets decided to get crafty and sign a guy that has not been reliable since 2019. Giving Jesse Winker $7.5 million, while good fan service, was bad process because you knew about his back issues. He was barely able to play through them in the playoffs last year. And you gave him $7.5 million for this payroll, and he played 20 games. And you knew that he was a DH only. You knew that he provided you no defensive capability. Another horrible move. The trade for Jose Siri is awful. You had Tyrone Taylor on the roster already. Siri comes in with basically the same tools and a worse offensive profile. He doesn't even play for 4 months, and then when he does play, he's so bad on both sides of the ball that you DFA him. The Mets had 3 center fielders this year, and they were trying desperately to replace Tyrone Taylor, and they couldn't do it because everyone they brought in was worse. And it stinks because everything Stearns did do well ended up only lasting for a month at most. Griffin Canning was a revelation for this team, and then he tore his Achilles. AJ Minter was the man in the bullpen for the first month and a half, and then he goes down with an elbow injury, and who knows when we see him again. The Clay Holmes signing is terrific for a 5-starter. It's terrific. He finishes the year with 2 WAR, a 3.5 ERA, 165 innings, as many as Sevy, which I just mentioned. That is a terrific sign for a 4 or 5 starter, except you did so bad everywhere else that Clay Holmes ends up being the 2, and he bears the criticism for that when he's having his first season as a starter since 2018. People blaming Clay Holmes. What are we doing? Come on. He is not the reason this team failed this year. And then all these wins on the margins between Max Kranick, who got overused to hell to the point where he got hurt. You know, guys that performed in these quadruple A roles. Chris Davinsky deserved a spot in this team late in the year, but he kept going up and down. Rico Garcia got DFA'd. It's just, there were so many moments in the season with the hundreds of thousands of roster moves that the Mets could have put themselves in a better situation and just completely failed to do that. I'm so curious about this David Stearns media availability later in the day. I think it's at 3 p.m. Part of me doesn't want to listen to a word he has to say because I'm still mad at him, but I'm so curious to see how he spends this and what amount of accountability he takes for a disastrous season, point blank. I think Gary said it was either in game 2 or game 3 of this Marlins series that it was the Mets are I think the 3rd worst team ever to start a season 45-24 and then end with a specific record of 83 wins. I think it's like the 3rd worst finish after that start. And that's crazy. But it's symbolic. I know I keep using that word, but the fact that this team was the best team in baseball for 60 odd games shows you that the roster construction of this team was not built for 162. So there's a lot to be learned from that. And I hope that they can learn from that because the guys that you paid the big money for did the job and you couldn't provide them with the supporting cast to just get to 84 wins. I mean, let's go even further than that. On Sunday, July 27th, after completing the sweep of the San Francisco Giants, the Mets were 62-44. So you didn't even need to play 500 ball the rest of the way. You could play below that and still make the playoffs. And obviously it wouldn't feel good. But that's just how hard this team crashed and burned. And that's not a collapse. That is a slow, agonizing death. A collapse is quick, it's sudden, it is unforeseen, and it's shocking. But I think if you ask any Mets fan that watched this team the last 2 months, none of this is shocking. You could see it coming from a mile away. My goodness. A team with great individual performances that just could not seem to win as a team. And whether you want to blame that on leadership, lack of preparedness, the coaching staff, or the roster construction, you can blame all of it. You can blame one of those things. It doesn't matter. Everyone is at fault, except for the guys that are going to get criticized the most. The guys that faced the media yesterday. Francisco Lindor looking like he wanted to well up and cry, and I can't blame him because you can see how much he cares about this team and how much he wants them to win. And he can't do it himself. Baseball is the only sport really where guys in major positions putting together major seasons cannot lift a team by themselves. And you'd think with a guy who built the Milwaukee Brewers from the ground up with no payroll and found a way to make that a sustainable winning roster, you'd think that he could provide his 3 stars a supporting cast that could get them there. And he couldn't do it. A lot deserves to be said about David Stearns this year. And I've sung a lot of praises for David Stearns, and rightfully so. His career resume cannot be denied. The moves that he's made in the past cannot be denied. He resurrected a franchise and made them a perennial winner. But he had a disastrous year, and he has a lot to prove. And then it comes down to Steve Cohen as well, who I don't think deserves too much blame. You know, he funded the team. He backed up his words with his wallet. He got fans back in the ballpark, imploring them to do so, and his roster failed him. I will say I'd like to see less tweets next year, because if you go on his Twitter right now, it's not a pretty look. It's not one that ages particularly well. What was the one that I saw? There seems to be less complaining after the team scored 7 runs in the 8th and 9th. Funny how that happens. That was tweeted on July 12th. There's only been 2 tweets since then. Wonder why? I think the fans have plenty to complain about. And a lot needs to be answered for. Just a purely disastrous season. Okay. So that was what? That was about 30-ish minutes of ranting. Let's spin it now. Because realistically, as strange as it might sound, after one of the most frustrating and disastrous seasons in franchise history, there's a lot to point to and look forward to with this franchise. Obviously, the 3 stars, or I guess 2 stars are only locked up for now in Soto and Lindor, but we'll see what happens with Pete Alonso. I'm sure he wants to come back. I'm sure the Mets will have to pay him more than they did last time. Maybe it's false confidence, and maybe there's going to be more suitors this time around. Like I think a lot of the lowly teams in the league that didn't hit this year, Pittsburgh Pirates, open up your wallet. I think those teams could benefit from Pete Alonso, but I think he wants to come back here, and I think the Mets recognize what they would be missing without Pete Alonso, who played all 162, was a 3-WAR player, led the league in doubles, had another high 30s home run season, and was the run-driving force behind Juan Soto. There's no reason to not bring him back as the lights go out. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what that means. So there's that. You have that. Sure. Core of your franchise, core of your lineup, yes. Brett Beatty's a guy. 3-WAR season, 18 homers. Showed that he can play really good defense at multiple positions. He's a guy. Francisco Alvarez responded to a demotion and responded to great adversity and responded to multiple injuries by being a beacon of the offense throughout the entire last 6 weeks of the season. And it's a shame that he had the game 162 that he had, because outside of that, his performance down the stretch was none other than heroic. And he's 23 years old. And I think he's only going to get better. And I think this was finally the year where his development really took a step and in his mentality improved a lot. He showed a lot of maturity this year. I'm excited for him. On the pitching side of things, you hope that Edwin Diaz opts in, because then you have the best closer in baseball. I think the Clay Holmes signing was a huge success, and you have him for another year. And it looks like this young trio of starting pitchers is going to be promising. I mean, Nolan McLean, for 8 starts, was one of the best pitchers in baseball. And he's going to be leading the charge next year. And you can supplant him with new arms and support him in that way and build a much stronger rotation if you go about it right. Brandon Sproat had his ups and downs, but from what I saw from him, that's a major league starter. That's a guy that's going to compete for a roster spot next year. I really hate what they did to Jonah Tong. He got thrown into the fire at 22 years old. He didn't have a reliable third pitch, and he got rocked around, and you saw his childlike smile kind of fade away through these really tough 5 starts for him. He's probably going to start the year at AAA, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone more talented in terms of arm talent in the Mets minor league system than Jonah Tong right now. And I sincerely hope that the Mets don't act irrationally and use him in trade talks or something like that, because I've heard that floated around, and I don't want to see that happen. So those 3 are your beacon of light for the rotation next year so that it doesn't turn out the way it did this year. Those are the pieces you look at for the 2026 Mets and say, okay, like this is where we build from. Everything else can go. I mean, they're going to build this bullpen from scratch, and they've shown that they can win on the margins in the bullpen, but I mean, they need to have better process than they did this year. The rotation, a lot of guys in the middle. I mean, David Peterson, what do you do with that season? A terrific first half after a terrific 2024 season, and then as bad as it could possibly get in the second half. Who knows if he's hurt? Who knows if he's been pitching through fatigue? But that is not a guy that you can reliably count on for a full 162-game season, I don't think. I mentioned before, Kodai Senga doesn't really know who he is anymore. I don't know what you do with that. Tyler McGill, he's going to miss the entirety of next year. Sean Manaea, I don't know what you do with that. Hopefully there's some sort of injury that you can resolve. Jeff McNeil might have played his last game as a New York Met. That's a guy with one more year on his contract before he starts hitting those option years, and he had a 2-war season, and he plays multiple positions, and I just think that maybe these two sides need to separate. And maybe he needs a change of scenery, and maybe the Mets need a change of energy. I don't know. I've never been a guy that criticizes Jeff McNeil all that much. I think he's a good ball player. But he's spent 10 years with this organization now, less than that, 8 years with this organization, and maybe both sides just need a change. And it also opens the door for Brett Beatty to play every day, and it opens the door for the Mets to make a different kind of addition in their infield. I don't know. That's something to think about. Marte is going to come off the books. I don't know what you do with Mark Vientos. The 2024 postseason was awesome, but it's going to be over a year old now. And he showed no signs outside of a couple weeks in August that he is that player. And he doesn't have a position. And I sure as shit am not going to let Pete Alonso walk so Mark Vientos can play first base, because I saw him play first base and it wasn't any prettier. There's decisions to be made there. Luis Angel Acuna doesn't really look like he can take a major league at bat. Yeah, he's young, and yeah, he plays good defense and can run the bases. That's a valuable bench piece. All this to say, and I could go down the list and keep going about the futures of all these guys, but if nothing else, the Cohen era regime provides an eventful offseason, and this offseason is going to be no different. And I guess that's a fitting way to leave the show about just the Cohen era in general. So we're now in year 5. That was year 5. And you remember the most significant quote from Steve Cohen's initial presser when he bought the team was, if I don't win the World Series in 3 to 5 years, it would be a slight disappointment. Well, here we are, 5 years in, 2 playoff berths. One of them was a first-round wildcard loss, and the other one was one of the more memorable seasons in team history because of a Latin pop star and JD Martinez taking over as hitting coach for the staff. By the way, I need that staff cleaned out. Antoine Richardson, lifetime contract. He led Juan Soto to lead the league in stolen bases. He's not going anywhere. If someone makes a competitive offer for him, you double it. Jeremy Hefner, I still kind of believe in that brain, and he's been with this org for a while, and I think that he's gotten a lot out of pitchers, and I think that what happened this year isn't necessarily his fault. I think it came down to guys running out of steam and possibly pitching hurt, and I don't know, but maybe he becomes the scapegoat for that. The hitting coaches, you're out. I think that's an easy win for this team to make someone a scapegoat and show that you're not willing to accept this performance. I think that's an easy win, especially because last year, JD Martinez became the guy that everybody cited as the reason for the offense turning around.
We had quotes about Francisco Lindor imploring Eric Chavez to do his job last year. And I know if you listen to a lot of other Mets pods, they'll talk about Eric Chavez. I've kind of kept those words in because I just don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I don't know what those conversations are. But I prefer my hitting coach not posting Instagram stories, getting back at fans for criticizing him. I'd prefer that. That would bring me some peace of mind. Act like a professional. Don't act like a fan. I don't know. 5 years into the Cohen era regime, 2 playoff berths, which is technically an unprecedented amount of success for this franchise. There's not too many points in the history of this franchise you can point to and say, wow, they made the playoffs multiple times in the span of 4 years, which is a terribly sad statement, but it is true. He's shown a willingness to open the wallet and get big stars, and he changed the perception of this team around the league, at least initially, when he brought in Juan Soto and obviously traded for Lindor and all that, but there is still plenty of room for growth. And it is clear that a new owner has not shaved the perception of the Mets and the weird curse that they bear when they put on that uniform. Because we had plenty of LOL Mets moments this year. We had plenty of just things that got away this year. And I think that if it were another team, it might have not gone down that way. If all these players were on the same roster but wearing a different uniform, maybe it goes down differently. I don't know. But that's how it feels sometimes as a Mets fan. Sometimes it feels like you can only spend so much money and invest so much in a roster and make the right amount of moves at a trade deadline. Sometimes it just comes down to the uniform they wear, and this season felt like that. It felt like the Mets just could not get out of their own way. The craziest part is that it's not like 2022 where the Atlanta Braves chased you down and took it from you with 102 wins. It's not like last year where they were in the same situation, tied for a wild card spot on the last day of the season with tiebreakers running it rampant. No one came and got you this year. You completely let it slip through your fingers. The Reds in their last 80 games went 40-40. And that is all it took for them to usurp the Mets and get that last spot. Obviously, them winning 4 out of 6 games against us played a huge role in that as well. But I mean, the Reds opened September with a record 1 game over 500. They only improved by 2 games. And that was all it took. So I feel for Mets fans because they don't deserve all the shit they're going to get this offseason and all the shit they're going to get next season. Basically, until this team finds success again, they're going to be getting shit. And all they wanted to do was just root for the team that provided them so much happiness last year. And they packed the house with a $40 parking price and $20 hot dogs and, season ticket packages in the 4 digits. All they wanted to do was just support the team that was starting to play a much more respectable brand of baseball. And this roster completely failed the fans this year. So next year, if you see empty seats in the stadium, don't blame Mets fans, blame the Mets. Because we tried. We tried to come out and support this team in droves, and my God, getting to the stadium this year was an absolute fucking nightmare because there were so many people there. And it filled me with a lot of pride as a Mets fan. The pride I had walking around the stadium and people wanting to say what's up and chat about the team and chat about baseball, and me having to walk around hordes of legs just to get to my seat in the 500s that was packed. That filled me with a lot of pride. A feeling I haven't really had a lot as a Mets fan in my entire life. The fans were proud to be Mets fans. And this is how this team responded. Sucks. Mets fans don't deserve this. The 2025 Mets, though, absolutely deserve this. They deserve every ounce of criticism they're going to get. They deserve all the media shitstorm that's going to rain upon them. They deserve it. The fans don't. That's the worst part. That's the part that makes me upset the most. Otherwise, I've seen plenty of bad Mets teams. I've seen plenty of Mets teams that shoot themselves in the foot and pave the way for other teams to have magic years. I've seen that plenty. Honestly, I'm used to that. That part doesn't bother me as much. The part that bothers me is the way they did the fans this year. Heads got to roll. Shit's got to change. Otherwise, I promise you, this team's not going to be fourth in attendance next year, and you're setting no new ticket records. I promise you that. I could keep going, but I think that's all I got to say. Oof. Thank God it's over. Sure, I could have done 2 more days and spun some optimism for a wild card round, but this team was not winning shit this year. It was at the point where it would have felt weird if they had a champagne celebration. Because it doesn't really feel like they earned it. And they fully didn't earn it. Thank you so much for listening throughout this entire year. You guys make Shea Station go. It's been really awesome to, maintain a friendship with a former Met. And a huge reason for that is because of you guys supporting what we do. So we really appreciate you. Thank you for subscribing and listening throughout the entire year. Thank you for enduring this awful baseball team with us throughout the entire year. It is much appreciated. We're not going anywhere. Shea Station lives on, despite the Mets. But we will be back, I think, later this week. I'll iron it out with Jerry, and you'll see a post on our socials about a possible voicemail app, because I do want to hear from you guys. I don't think we did a voicemail app this year, and what better time to do one than at the apex of misery for this 2025 Mets season. I'm sure the off season will be eventful. There'll be plenty of shows to follow that as well. But for now, read a book, play the video game you've been meaning to play, go apple picking, go outside and have a picnic, hit up the local town market. I don't know. Do anything but watch Mets baseball, which we thankfully don't have to do for a long while. For 180 days, we're free from the shackles of blue and orange. That's all I got, though. I don't know when I'll see you guys next, probably later this week, and then we'll take a little break after that. But unfortunately still, because we can't quit them, they're a team we can't divorce from. LFGM. And it leaves a bad taste in my mouth saying that. Ugh.